Hello and welcome to another Falling Walls breakthrough conversation here at Falling Walls 2021. This is an opportunity for us to bring scientists, innovators, researchers, entrepreneurs, all sorts of people in this broad scientific community together with you actually, so that you can listen to some breakthrough ideas and to get into the debate and ask some questions. We want to bring these wonderful people closer to you and give you the opportunity to engage and ask questions. As I say, this is a breakthrough conversation, and today we're very lucky to have Francesca Santoro from the, Istituto Italiano di Tecnologia.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you very
Very
much.
good.
Wow. Excellent. Big shout out to Marilena. I hope you're listening to my Italian there. Thank you so much for joining us here. We're going to get into Francesca's science in a minute. I'm Zulfikar Abani, just so you know, from DW, Deutsche Welle, a German public broadcaster. A bit of housekeeping. We do want you to engage and to ask some questions, so please do that. As you'll know from Zoom, use the raise hand function, and then we'll spot you, we'll spotlight you even, and unmute you, and then we'll just come to you and ask you a question. And we may even ask you a follow-up question if you behave yourselves. So please do that. If you have any technical problems, just write a little note in the chat, and our technical team will help you solve that problem. You should know that that part is audio only, so you won't be visible on the screen. It's just us, but you should also know that this conversation is being recorded just for your sort of privacy sakes, but also for posterity, so you know you can always come back and enjoy the conversation again. I do believe that's all for my housekeeping, so I'm going to put this note away and I'm going to go back to my blank piece of paper. Now, Francesca, you are involved in an area in research and science that I find both fascinating. I've used that word far too often today, but I do find it fascinating, but at the same time incredibly scary. I find it fascinating because of the benefits. Before I say any more, can you perhaps describe in a sentence what it is that you do?
Yeah, so my research group and I work on developing new electrical engineering platforms like microchips to be interfaced with different parts of the body, like from the brain and the skin, and really to use electricity to stimulate the cell activity.
Right, okay, that's a very compressed. I wasn't expecting it to be that compressed.
I think you said one sentence.
I did indeed. But we're talking about sort of like, micro devices, in a sense, that we're putting into the body. And that's sort of like at the cutting edge of a couple of things. It's at the cutting edge of technology, but it's also at the cutting edge of where society sees itself as, like, in terms of humanity, digitalization and what have you, and what we can expect from technology that we may wear on the outside of our, actually there's a very analog watch here, but on the outside of our bodies, but also put on the inside of our bodies. Can you tell us what interests you, what got you into that, and why, is this the future? Is this, really one of the most pressing and the best frontiers to be working at?
Well, of course, as you mentioned, this is also somewhat a bit scary, right? Because we can really collect lots of data from the body, from the activity of lots of tissues and organs. But the way we design those microchips that can, of course, monitor the activity, for instance, of a brain and also stimulate certain brain areas, is really meant to be used mainly for neurodegenerative diseases, so for healthcare in principle. So we really try to reproduce the neuronal activity with those artificial micro devices in order to really restore lost functionalities, which are happening, as I said, because of diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So they effectively have an impact on the resolution of tasks in daily life. So it is like somehow like a technology that could be scary in some sense, but we really try to use them as good as possible for medical applications.
I mean, if I'm sort of imagining this correct, I did use this analogy at a different session at Falling Walls 2021. This idea that certain devices can be used in the area of neurodegenerative conditions the same way as a heart monitor or a pacemaker may be used. So we're having these sorts of devices that can either sort of help a biological organ get back into mode, but also we can track its development, right? I mean, because that's really important, isn't it? To see sort of micro progressions in a neurodegenerative condition, right?
Yeah, exactly. So our aim, like the aim of using those platforms, is really like to have a sort of pacemaker in the brain when it's needed, and also to track over time how cells can really respond and if they respond physiologically. So this means that those micro devices can really seamlessly integrate within a neuronal network, and this will also ensure very nice stability over time. So this is correct. So we can both use like electricity when it's necessary to, say, give it a shock, but also have the same device to monitor over time.
And how are these devices controlled? I mean, because I've heard about certain devices in this area where it can be controlled from outside, kind of, you get remote control. How do you control the devices you're working on?
Well, so first of all, we mainly work with in vitro systems. So the very first step of the development, those technologies, again, in the future could be implantable. And the way they work, so the more traditional ones, they cannot be controlled from the outside. So they need someone to watch after, let's say, the monitoring process or the simulation process. The devices we develop, they are somehow adaptive. So this means that they can themselves intrinsically adapt to the activity of neuronal cells without the input, like without an external input.
Okay.
So this means that we call them neuromorphic. So they act like real neurons, even though those are like electrical devices. Yeah. And this means they can really remember how much and how they have been talking with other neuronal cells. And this is why they would then adapt themselves based on this.
So am I right in thinking that the sort of a primary application of this would be in an area such as Parkinson's, where you've got, you know, it's basically more muscular in a sense, the degeneration? Or are we also seeing, can you see a future where this could be used in dementia, where we also think so the memory loss, cognitive ability, and cognitive speed, and that sort of thing? How does that progress?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. So this is actually a whole plethora of dreams that we have as ultimate goals of the use of this platform in the future. So at the moment, we can really recreate artificial neural networks or biohybrid neural networks in vitro, and this is already very good to test new drugs, right? Because you don't need to get cells from animals or patients. You do have fake neurons, let me say that do behave and respond like real neurons. And so this means that we can have a fast screening of lots of drugs, which is also quite limitations in the study of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Of course, if we think more to the future, for sure, having those microchips which can replace and reconnect multiple contact points within neuronal networks means that they can really restore memory when it's lost, which is, of course, at the basis of many cognitive processes in our brain, and also in Parkinson's, act also a connection towards, let's say, muscular junctions, or ultimately, this kind of, let's say, biohybrid microprocessors could be also very, let's say, optimal connections to prosthetic devices, like artificial limbs. Yeah. So they can be really a smart nervous connection for multiple applications where, let's say, the nervous system is affecting or playing a major role.
Wow, that's okay. That's a big palette there. I have to ask one other sort of old-fashioned sort of 30,000 feet question, bad cliche, but there is a lot of research also in terms of neural networks in other areas, sort of, you know, in non-human spheres. But, you know, in a sense, it's, how should I formulate this question? It's difficult to be talking about a human world and a digital world as though they're separate. But we are seeing a lot of development now in it where these two worlds are intersecting, and both are real in a sense to us. Do you, I mean, where are you placed with that? I mean, it's a very broad question, but where are you placed in that? Do you have any fears where you can say that maybe this sort of information that you're collecting, this data, your area of research, could be used for, commercial means to basically manipulate the way people think or feel about or move about, in society. And I'm being a little bit, sort of conspiratorial here, but I wonder whether there is that, because it's I think that's why I mentioned this sort of this. It's again an intersection, between technology and science, real health needs, and a part of society where we really lack information out there and awareness of what's going on. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
Well, what you call intersection, for us as researchers in bioelectronics is called interface. So for us, where we can really take advantage of the electrical functionalities of these devices to be exploited for, let's say, stimulating biological system, that's where, let's say, our boundaries are. So as you mentioned, this is somehow, let's say, scary, and the boundary is also very thin. So that's a very thin line. However, I guess our technology is really just mainly aiming to healthcare purposes. So it's really, as far as, let's say, some movie-like plots, very sci-fi kind of things, like thoughts can be done here. I guess it's really in the hands of the researchers that develop this technology to set the boundaries and set how those platforms can be really meant to be used only for improving patients' lives.
Okay, thank you. Just at that point, I'd like to sort of like venture again to do the old traditional into the camera. If you've got questions, and I'm sure you do have questions, you want to raise your hand now, because we've got another 10 minutes to go. I've still got questions, so I'm sure you do as well. Please ask your questions. We know you're out there. Jessica, I mean, you mentioned science fiction there, and I mean, I sort of, yes, but science fiction in its old forms was written by many people who were technologists themselves. Yeah. Cryptography was basically designed.
We're a big fan of technology, of course.
Yeah, big fans of technology and all the rest of it. And we do have, it's sort of the hype has died down a little bit, but there was a lot of talk about, cyborg lives and all the rest of it. People having implants and what have you a couple of years ago. And I think that, I think I want to get back to the public health in a second, but just give me another impulse about this, about the sort of, how do you approach the level of security when you're dealing with devices that are basically electrical, and can be controlled. I mean, electricity flows through us, right? So
of course, yeah.
How do you deal with that in a secure, and in the sense of like getting funding, because that's sort of the bridge for me, is that you need public funding, you need to appease or reassure your funders and everything that
Yeah, of course, and this is actually a great thought, because more and more also when we design new research project, we are teaming up with people that are experts in ethics and law, just to make sure that although, like in our case, we really do still fundamental research, but we're still not, let's say, as I said, going over this very thin line. And I guess just by connecting, let's say, all our expertise, we can make sure that still we can have a great advance from a technological point of view, but we're still protecting the patient, but in general, persons that use our technology from, let's say, a possible leakage of information and let's say, personal, let's say, data that can be then used in a different way. Yeah. Also, like this idea of the cyborg is really, we really try to change this kind of a bad idea, kind of the cyborg is, right? As a very bad character from the movies, in turning it in being like a good cyborg, like where technology and electrical devices can really help our daily life in a safe way. So having technology that also makes us being better and optimized in certain tasks, but also being safe.
Two thoughts just came up. I think I forgot one of them.
Okay.
I'm going to try and remember the other one. I mean, I'm going to go back to, again, a sort of a safe thought in my head, and that is, a lot of these technologies are developed in sort of European fields, but we are talking about, I imagine, I haven't researched this, but I imagine that the research into neurodegenerative conditions in African countries is a lot less than it is in Europe or North America. Where do you see the challenges, but also the opportunities there for your research? I mean, can you go out there? Is there an acceptance? We may be a little bit more okay with being cyborgs here in Europe than in other communities.
Yeah, well, I guess, as you mentioned, this is also very much like finding a large acceptance where the community and society is more ready and more used to this kind of technology, right? I mean, those microchips are already in our smartphones, and there are definitely places in the world where smartphones are like even a dream, right? So I guess it's really like the challenge there is to get this, let's say, big gap, community-based, much smaller in the next, let's say, 10 years. So really trying to bring, let's say, digitalization in also countries where this is still way very far. Also, I guess one way to do this is try to exploit the current technology that we have, let's say, to more closer urgent needs of these countries. So perhaps we can still use our devices for other kind of diseases that are more, let's say, spread and popular in other countries, like for example, like Africa, as you mentioned. So I'm pretty sure there is like a room of adapting technologies to more urgent needs that they might have, and this could be, let's say, the first step towards bringing them more on the technological side, and also to approach them and make them aware that these kind of platforms, they could be used for quite a variety of, let's say, diseases that they might have.
One more broadish sort of question, and then I just want to come back, and then come back at the end to a little bit more about your specific research. I want to know whether you feel that we, as generally speaking, a global community, need to rethink the way we think about ourselves as living things, organisms. Philosophically, we've long wanted to see ourselves as separate from the rest of the so-called animal kingdom, even though we are animals ourselves, right? So do you think that and particularly because in your area, you're talking about the brain, which is like, it's if you ask people what's important for your life, it's my head and it's my heart, right?
Yeah.
I can kind of live without arms and legs, but my head, my heart, without them, I'm nothing, right? So do we have to rethink the way we think about ourselves as living organisms in order to sort of meet all sorts of challenges in the future? And neurodegenerative conditions is like one of the top things.
Of course. I mean, this is also because, people are aging, and so these kind of diseases are very close to our, let's say, to our future in a way. Well, this is a very good question, particularly to ask to an engineer, right? They are the most, I guess, pragmatic researchers ever. So, yeah, although, I'm an electrical engineer, we actually try to rethink living organism based on electricity in a way. So this is a kind of a simplified approach. And this is also try to decode lots of biological process in bits, so just a 0 and a 1. So I know it might sound extremely simplified, but this is in the end what we could really do. And so this kind of approach could really help, let's say, to analyze in a better way certain processes which maybe are still undiscovered and unknown. And so, yes, in a way, we should just rethink ourselves and keep, let's say, other than the brain and the heart, connected in a way that, in our case, an electrical engineer can really help to see how other parts can be rethought and preserved.
I mean, because it's one of the other sort of things that I think of when I think about sort of rethinking the way we think about ourselves is like, how long do we actually want to live? Quite truly. I mean, you can either mitigate the worst of death, or you can try to overcome death, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like I want to live as long as possible. I want to live as good as possible, like in the best way. So it's really trying to also, in our case, in a way, contribute to develop technology that can improve the quality of life, other than just getting as far as possible with the age.
Yeah. Okay, and so what are the next steps for your research now? What are the big challenges that you see ahead of you, like, you know, positively speaking?
Well, as I mentioned, we really do in my research group a lot of, let me say, fundamental research. So a lot of, let's say, bench work with cells, and we really don't see any patient at all in our daily life. So I really truly see that our main challenge is try to get more towards, let's say, testing, and more to, let's say, clinical translation. That could be really, let's say, a boost to understand whether our technology is being developed in the right direction, or what we can, let's say, fine tune.
So you want patients, basically, in a sense?
Yeah. Or let's say to really closely collaborate with clinicians to really understand their needs, to better design our platforms.
And I mean, is it difficult to get to that point? I mean, really, to come back to reiterate that question, is it hard to get people who are willing to do this sort of stuff with you?
Well, I must say not anymore. Maybe in the past, I have to say, also the pandemic had shortened all kind of distances among, let's say physical distances, but also research distances. So it has been a great boost in this regard. So we are starting like collaborating and having a very interesting conversation with people, which could really, like clinician, as I mentioned, that could really give us like and set the gears of what is necessary for better design those materials and those micro devices, and give us also a more deep understanding of the biological and the medical problem, which, you know, as engineers sometimes we might miss a bit.
Well, listen, Francesca, I wish you the best of luck, because I think it's a really important area of research. And I mean, as lots of areas of research are very important, but I really do think it's very important, purely also because it's very mysterious. I think there's so much still to be learned, and so many people affected, and not only the people who have those conditions, but also the people who live with those people who have those conditions.
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you very much for your time. We are up against the clock, as ever. Francesca Santoro, beautiful. Thank you very much for talking to us. I'm going to give you a fist bump. There you go.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's been great. Stick around. That was another Falling Walls breakthrough conversation, and there'll be more in about 5 minutes.